The small town of Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, was no stranger to legends, but none was as chilling as the tale of Charlie No Face, the Green Man. Locals warned against wandering the Old South Tunnel after dark, where shadows danced unnaturally and strange whispers echoed off the stone walls. They said the Green Man didn't just haunt the tunnel, he hunted it. It started as a challenge. Four friends, Ryan, Jess, Mike, and Carrie, had heard the stories all their lives. They were tired of the rumors and eager to prove the legend a hoax. Armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility that only teenagers possess, they ventured out on a moonless October night, their breath visible in the crisp air. The tunnel loomed ahead like a black maw. Jess hesitated at the entrance. "Are we sure about this?" Mike laughed, the bravest of the group. "What's the worst that could happen? Charlie No Face isn't real." "Then why do they call it his tunnel?" Carrie asked. Ryan rolled his eyes. "It's just a story to keep people away from this place. Come on, let's go." The four stepped inside, their footsteps echoing eerily. The air grew colder the deeper they ventured. Water dripped from the walls, and a strange, metallic smell hung heavy. Jess paused, shining her flashlight toward a dark smear on the wall. "What is that?" she asked. Ryan leaned in. "Rust?" Jess touched it hesitantly, then yanked her hand back. "It's sticky." Carrie shone her light higher, revealing a handprint smeared in dark crimson. The group fell silent. "Probably some kids messing around," Mike said, though his voice wavered. Then, faintly, they heard it, a low, rasping breath that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Who's there?" Ryan called, his voice echoing into the void. The breathing stopped, replaced by a faint green glow emanating from deeper within the tunnel. "I'm out," Jess whispered, stepping back toward the entrance. "Don't be a coward," Mike snapped, though he himself hesitated to move forward. The glow grew stronger, illuminating the uneven walls. A figure began to take shape, a hunched silhouette with arms too long and a face that wasn't a face at all. Its skin shimmered with an unnatural, sickly green, and where its eyes should have been were only hollow, black voids. It stepped closer, its head tilting as if sizing them up. "Charlie?" Carrie whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure stopped, its head snapping toward her. It raised one hand, twisted and claw-like, and dragged its nails across the tunnel wall. The sound was unbearable, a metallic screech that set their teeth on edge. "Run!" Ryan shouted. The group turned and bolted, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly. The Green Man didn't chase them outright. Instead, his slow, deliberate footsteps echoed, never speeding up but somehow always closer. Jess's screams echoed as the group bolted toward the exit, her flashlight spinning on the wet tunnel floor. She scrambled backward, her palms scraping against the rough surface, as the glowing figure loomed over her. "Help me," she cried, her voice cracking with terror. The Green Man tilted his head, his hollow eyes staring into her soul. Slowly, he extended a long, clawed finger, brushing it against her cheek. The touch burned like acid, and Jess shrieked in agony. "Leave her!" Ryan shouted, but his voice sounded distant. The others hesitated for a heartbeat before fleeing, their survival instincts overwhelming their loyalty. Jess's skin began to bubble and blister, turning the same sickly green as her attacker. Her cries became garbled, her voice strangled as her features twisted unnaturally. Her body convulsed, and then she fell silent. When the Green Man stepped back, Jess's hollow, glowing eyes snapped open. She was no longer herself, just another ghostly warden of the South Tunnel. The group burst out of the tunnel, their breaths ragged. "Where's Jess?" Carrie sobbed. Ryan shook his head, too shaken to speak. Mike, trembling, pointed back toward the tunnel. The green glow spilled out into the night, and within it, they saw Jess, her skin now green, her face twisted into the same hollow visage as the creature. She stepped forward, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Run!" Ryan shouted again. They sprinted to the safety of the town, but their story wasn't believed. The police searched the tunnel the next day and found no trace of Jess or the Green Man. Months later, whispers spread of more disappearances. Each time, a greenish glow was reported near the south tunnel, and each time, the legend of Charlie No Face grew darker. The survivors knew the truth. The Green Man wasn't a ghost or a victim of tragedy, he was something far older and far worse. And he didn't just haunt the tunnel. He claimed it. Now, when the wind carries faint, rasping breaths and an eerie glow flickers in the distance, the people of Beaver Falls know better than to investigate. Because Charlie No Face is always watching, waiting for his next victim. The legend of Charlie No Face wasn't just a story, it was a warning. That night, 4 friends, Ryan, Jess, Mike, and Carrie, who ventured into the south tunnel to disprove the legend. By dawn, only 2 of them would remain. Hours after escaping the tunnel, Ryan, Mike, and Carrie took refuge in Ryan's basement. They locked the doors, barricaded the windows, and huddled together under the dim glow of a single lamp. "It's not real," Mike muttered, pacing back and forth. "It's not real. It's just a stupid story." "You saw him." Carrie snapped. "You saw Jess." Ryan sat in silence, staring at his trembling hands. The faint smell of burnt metal still lingered in his nostrils. Mike shook his head. "I'm not staying here. This is all in our heads." "Mike, don't," Ryan started, but Mike was already halfway up the stairs. "I'm going home," Mike declared, slamming the basement door behind him. The walk to his house was eerily quiet. The town seemed lifeless, the streetlights flickering as if barely clinging to power. He tried to ignore the faint metallic smell in the air and the nagging feeling that he was being watched. As he approached his front porch, Mike froze. His shadow stretched out in front of him, but something moved within it, a faint green glow. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. There, at the edge of the street, stood the Green Man and Jess, who stood beside him, her face twisted and inhuman, her glowing eyes locked onto Mike's. "No," Mike whispered, backing away. "Stay away from me." The Green Man raised his arm, pointing directly at him. The air grew heavy, and Mike's chest tightened. He gasped for air, clutching at his throat as an invisible force dragged him to his knees. Jess moved forward, her movements jerky and unnatural. She placed her hand on his face, and Mike's skin began to sizzle. His screams echoed through the empty streets, but no one came to help. When it was over, the Green Man and his new servant disappeared into the night, leaving only Mike's smoldering shoe on the porch. By dawn, only Ryan and Carrie remained. They told no one what they had seen, though the horror was etched into their faces. The south tunnel remained quiet for weeks, but the faint green glow could still be seen at times, flickering deep within the shadows. And when the wind whispered softly, it carried the faint sound of Jess's and Mike's screams, a chilling reminder that the Green Man was still there, watching, waiting. Ryan and Carrie didn't speak as the first light of dawn seeped through the cracks of Ryan's basement window. They hadn't slept, the horrors of the south tunnel replaying in their minds, the hollow gaze of the Green Man, the sickening transformation of Jess, and Mike's final, agonized screams. Ryan finally broke the silence. "We can't tell anyone. They'll never believe us." Carrie nodded absently, her hands trembling as she clutched a blanket around her shoulders. "But he's out there, and he won't stop." The faint smell of burnt metal still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the malevolent force they had barely escaped. For a few days, the town was quiet. Ryan and Carrie avoided each other, each trying to process their trauma alone. But the Green Man didn't forget. Carrie first noticed something was wrong when the streetlights near her house began flickering every night. The familiar metallic smell followed her everywhere, at work, in her car, even in her dreams. She swore she heard faint footsteps when she was alone, always accompanied by a soft rasping breath. Ryan experienced the same. Every shadow felt deeper, every creak in his old house louder. When he passed a mirror one night, he froze. Behind him, for the briefest moment, he saw a faint green glow. They realized they couldn't escape. Late one night, Carrie burst into Ryan's house, pale and frantic. He's coming for us, she gasped, slamming the door shut. We have to end this. How? Ryan asked, though he had no better ideas. There's got to be something in the tunnel, Carrie insisted. Something that will stop him. A grave. A marker. Anything. Against their better judgment, they returned to the south tunnel, armed with flashlights, a crowbar, and a can of gasoline. The tunnel was just as they remembered, cold, damp, and suffocatingly silent. The metallic smell was stronger now, stinging their nostrils. As they ventured deeper, the green glow appeared again, flickering faintly in the distance. Carrie's voice trembled. What if this is a trap? Ryan gritted his teeth. Then we ended on our terms. Suddenly, the rasping breath filled the air. The green man stepped into view, his form more twisted and horrifying than they remembered. Behind him was Jess, her glowing eyes fixed on them, her twisted grin revealing rows of jagged teeth. You can't stop him, she rasped, her voice a guttural mockery of what it once was. You'll join us. Carrie screamed and hurled the gasoline can at Jess, splattering the green man as well. Ryan struck a match, the flame trembling in his fingers. Go to hell, he shouted, throwing it at the pair. The tunnel erupted in flames, the green glow mixing with orange firelight. The green man screamed, a sound that echoed with unnatural fury. His form writhed, flickering like a dying flame, but as the fire consumed him, his gaze locked onto Ryan and Carrie. You think this will end me? His voice hissed, disembodied and echoing around the tunnel. I am older than this place. I will always return. The glow faded, and the green man was gone. Ryan and Carrie fled, coughing from the smoke. They didn't look back until they reached the safety of daylight. For weeks, the south tunnel was declared unsafe, closed off by authorities investigating the fire. But Ryan and Carrie knew it wasn't over. Carrie began to dream of Jess, her face twisted and her voice calling out for her to return to the tunnel. Ryan found greenish handprints on his windows, faint but unmistakable. One night, the metallic smell returned, stronger than ever. A faint green glow appeared outside their houses. The green man was back. This time, there would be no escape. The flames had not been enough to destroy Charlie No Face. As Ryan and Carrie stood in the sunlight, gasping for breath, the remnants of the tunnel still burned behind them, but the fear in their eyes told the story: the green man had survived. He always did. It began with a whisper, a low, rasping breath carried on the wind. Ryan and Carrie tried to ignore it, but they knew. The presence of the green man was growing closer, again. His malevolent force was always lurking, like a shadow they could never outrun. The burns and scars that had marred his body were nothing but memories now. He was immortal, a creature born of terror, forever hungry for the souls of those who dared to cross him. Carrie's nightmares were filled with Jess, her glowing, hollow eyes staring at her from the corner of her room, her voice a twisted echo, whispering, "You cannot escape." But it wasn't just Carrie who felt the haunting presence. Ryan, too, felt his skin crawl every time he stepped outside. The wind smelled of iron and burning flesh, and the green glow flickered in the corner of his vision, always just out of reach. One night, with no other choice, they returned to the tunnel, their last desperate act. Carrie grabbed a pocket knife and a lighter. Ryan carried an old, rusted cross from his grandmother's church. Neither of them spoke, knowing words would not stop what was coming. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the land as they approached the entrance. The tunnel's black mouth loomed, a grotesque reminder of the nightmare they had narrowly escaped. But now, they had no choice. Ryan stepped forward, his breath shaky but determined. "We end this here," he muttered. Carrie gripped the knife tighter, her eyes darting around, constantly checking for signs of movement. The feeling of being watched by something far worse than any human, was almost unbearable. And then it came. The glow. Faint at first, just a flicker on the horizon, but it grew brighter, casting the tunnel in a sickly green light. The temperature dropped, frost clinging to the walls, the air thick with the smell of decay. They could hear him, his slow, methodical footsteps echoing through the darkness. He was coming for them. Before they could react, the green man appeared in the tunnel's entrance. His face, if it could be called a face, was a mass of scar tissue and raw, pulsing green skin. His hollow eyes locked onto them, and they felt the cold, suffocating weight of his gaze. Jess stood behind him, her body jerking as if controlled by strings, her mouth gaping open with an unnatural, silent scream.
You should never have come back.
The green man's voice rasped, though it was not from his mouth. It came from everywhere. The walls, the air, the ground itself seemed to tremble with his words. Carrie raised the knife, her hand shaking violently. "We'll stop you, Charlie. We'll make you pay." The green man's laughter was a sound unlike any other, low, guttural, filled with centuries of pain and hunger. "You cannot stop me. I am not the monster you think I am. I am what remains of all the lost souls who dared to challenge me." And then, in the blink of an eye, he lunged. Ryan tried to swing the cross, but the green man was faster. His claws raked across Ryan's chest, tearing through his clothes and skin as if it were paper. Carrie screamed as Ryan crumpled to the ground, blood pouring from the gaping wound. The green man turned to Carrie, his eyes glowing brighter with malice. Jess, now fully consumed by him, stepped forward, her hands reaching for Carrie, her once familiar face now a twisted mockery. Carrie stumbled backward, her breath quickening, but there was nowhere to run. The tunnel walls seemed to close in around her, the air growing thick, suffocating. She could feel the weight of the green man's presence, the pull of something dark and ancient. "Join me," Jess whispered, her voice now echoing with the green man's distorted tone. "Become one of us." Carrie raised the knife, stabbing blindly at the air, but it was useless. The green man's hand closed around her throat, lifting her off the ground. She gasped, her vision darkening as the world tilted and spun. "I have been waiting for you," he hissed, his breath cold against her ear. "Now, you are mine." With a final, desperate cry, Carrie felt her consciousness slip away. The last thing she saw was the green man's glowing eyes, her body now slowly dissolving, her skin turning to ash as she became one with him. When the authorities found the tunnel weeks later, all that remained was a charred, empty hollow. There was no trace of the four friends. No evidence of the green man's existence. Only the faint smell of burnt metal and the faintest, most unsettling glow, visible to those who dared to enter. The legend of Charlie No Face, the Green Man, continued. It spread beyond Beaver Falls, whispered across the state, and became more than just a story. Those who heard it were warned, but like all stories, it would fade from memory over time until another group of foolish souls would dare challenge the darkness. And the Green Man would be waiting, ever patient, forever vengeful.